Welcome to the Marvel Cinematic University podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Canton III, and we are here to discuss Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, the animated series on Disney+. First two episodes came out. Happy to do that. But before we get into that, patreon.com/MCUniversityPod, where you can get our bonus content such as the subscriber mailbag that is out, such as the solo mailbag that I did on wrestling last week. If you're so inclined, if you want to join in that, getting closer to Royal Rumble time, so it's a fun time on the road to WrestleMania. And then also we have John Wick 3 coming up very soon. And also the contest, the YouTube subscriber contest, where if you DM me or the show account, MC University Pod, on whatever platform you feel you want to and feel comfortable, DM your subscription screenshot, and you will have a chance to get a free ticket, or have your ticket paid, I should say, to Captain America Brave New World, as we are only a couple of weeks out from that movie coming out. So if you're listening to this on Friday morning, Friday evening, I will be doing the drawing and I will pick a winner. Actually, my son will pick the winner. And that's how we will go with that. But appreciate everybody for watching, listening, supporting, all of those good things. With that being said, introduce the super producer, Jake Christie. Jake, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you, AC?
I'm good. It's funny, before this call officially started, as far as the recording, we were, I don't know, how do you say, not venting, but getting a little bit of our feelings out about the current day. And I think the thing that I will stress to everybody who listens or watches this show, just briefly, as I say, before we get into these things, I think the best thing that everybody can do for the time being, and I understand it's a very difficult and stressful time for everyone, let's be kinder, let's have empathy, let's have sympathy, let's move in light, let's move in love, and we will work our way through whatever situation. And part of doing that is talking about Spider-Man. But I want to introduce our guests first. And first, our friend from not only the Discord, but our friend in general, Cecelia-Stokes. Cecelia, how you doing?
Good. Great. I think I'm going to step into compartmentalization mode and go, yeah, awesome. So good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I'm doing all right. All things considered, we gonna do the best we can to have a fun time. And with that being said, also our other friend, common member of our guests, Hunter Radesi. Hunter, how are you?
Yeah, I mean, like you just said, I'm here. I'm here talking to you guys about Spider-Man. So I guess life could be worse.
Exactly. And with that being said, we can finally talk about Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man. And I think one of the things that I will lead off quickly with this, before this show came out, I had a inclination, and Jake and I have discussed this part. I had an inclination to be like, I don't know about the animation. I don't know if this is gonna work. I'm not sure. But like with everything, you can't judge a book by its cover, because I do have to say I am pleasantly surprised by what I saw in these first two episodes. I think it was just very, not only very positive, and a lot of the reviews that reflected that positivity bore out in the show, in its writing, in its presentation, in a lot of the comic book Easter egg stuff for like nerds like me and you, Hunter. And just generally, I think there was just a very, it was just very aware of what any Spider-Man fan is interested in and any Spider-Man fan is looking for. And that's the biggest thing that stood out to me generally first. So, Cecelia, I'll start with you. Generally, what was your takeaway from these first two episodes?
I mean, unmitigated glee. I am going to love Spider-Man, with everything in me for the rest of my life. But I was really enjoying seeing the heart of Spider-Man. We only get to see him sans powers for a little bit, but even just right off the bat, he throws that brick at the Venom bug guy, and is like, "Hey, buddy, I don't think she's interested." It was awesome. I was like, he has so much heart, my little buddy. So that is really exciting to see and be a part of again, and it always kind of just gives that swell of happiness when you get to see that with him. So I'm excited to jump into it. I'm
Oh yeah, for sure.
really pumped.
And Hunter, how about you?
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear that like Jeff Trammell and his team seem to understand the character of Spider-Man pretty well, and like the character of Peter Parker, and like you said, kind of what makes him interesting to people. I was really anxious about the show before it came out. I mean,
Hmm.
Spider-Man and how he's represented means a lot to me, as it does to many people. But I was almost like exhausted by. I was afraid I was going to be exhausted by the show, I guess, is maybe how I should
Hmm.
phrase it. Whereas like I think we've seen the like young Spider-Man origin thing a lot, which, and don't get me wrong, like I do love it. And we've seen a lot of like MCU Spider-Man at this point, and like it was doing the whole like it's kind of MCU Spider-Man, but like it's not really MCU Spider-Man. It felt like there were a lot of ways it could go wrong, and I was kind of afraid of like turning it on and being almost like overwhelmed by everything it was trying to do, or like disappointed by too much repetition, or disappointed by being almost like too different, or I don't know. It was like I was like anxious to watch it, which sounds like so silly. um
No, I get what you're saying.
but then I hit play and I started watching it, and I made sure I had my like morning coffee and I was like comfortable, and I was like, I'm gonna make this like a ritual. It's gonna be nice, Saturday morning cartoon vibes. And it was so great, and it made it so easy to like forget about everything and forget about all the stuff I was worried about, and it was just like a really like nice beginning to a Spider-Man story. And I think that was great. And it's just kind of like you guys were saying, everything I loved about the character, and I got lost in it, and it was so entertaining, and it was so charming, and I think the characters were also likable, and I'm so excited to see more of them. So yeah, I'm really happy with it.
I'm glad you mentioned likable characters. That's something that we're going to focus on in a bit. But Jake, what were your general takeaways?
So yeah, I don't have as much to say just because honestly, because unfortunately I didn't grow up with Spider-Man cartoon, and I know that that's a lot of what people are relating it to. But I was with Hunter where I was worried about it in that it started off when it was first announced. It was supposed to be basically like a cartoon version of the MCU canonical Spider-Man's origin story, right? Like that's why it was originally sold. And then it was like, wait, no, it's not. It's not exactly that. And then we learned that Norman Osborn was in it, was being played by Coleman Domingo. So it's like, okay, it's very much not that. And you can very easily imagine a version of the show that is the most afterthought of an afterthought. That it's like, shit, we announced this and technically we have to make it. You know what I mean? Like, there's definitely with all the announcements of like, I'm like, this, there's no way that someone actually cared. But the thing about the MCU is, which is why I defend it, is like, in every pocket there are people who care. I'm positive that the people at the Walt Disney Corporation actually don't give a shit about the show, but that doesn't matter. The people who made the show care about the show. And I really like, I love the sincerityness, the earnestness of it, because it is obviously more geared towards kids. And as you know, I know AC you don't want to talk about, but and I can start off because it was the thing I responded to most because I didn't really have the nostalgia factor. It's like it's just nice that like almost everyone it seems like is a decent person, and I think that like that actually is what I what makes Spider-Man such a interesting character is that even his villains a lot of times that start off as decent people, and there's a fundamental decency that I think the reason why everyone seems like decent people is less because the characters are that way, but more because that's the way that Peter Parker sees the world. Like Peter Parker sees everyone as decent people, and I think that like the characterization of I apologize, I don't what's the name the quarterback
Lonnie Lincoln?
Lonnie, yeah, like the fact that he is a fully rounded person who's smart and nice. I'm like, of course, yeah, this is not afterthought with it. They're making conscious choices of how they're going to characterize characters because all of the tragedies and stresses of Spider-Man's life are actually made worse if everyone's nice. If Lonnie's nice to him pining after a girl is worse. If the people at Oscorp are nice to him having to run away is worse. You know what I mean? Like it compounds everything.
It's been easy, I think, for media generally over the past 30 years to do the whole, well, Flash Thompson is a bully and he's mean and he's just a jackass and all of those things. And I think to Jake's point, the more complicated and more interesting way to go about it is to make these people uh, empathetic. You're sympathetic to the Lonnie story in the
Mm-hmm.
first episode is pretty heavy for him. I think the fact that he's racially profiled by the police, he has to do. He's looking out for his family in terms of the car issues and all of those things going on. He cares about his fellow human being and Peter Parker. The assumption that Peter makes about him in terms of, oh, he's just gonna want to cheat off of my paper and my test and whatnot, and to do.
I do just want to say for the record that the 2 quarterbacks who were the starting at my school when I went there weren't that smart, so it's not always.
No,
Sorry.
yeah, I think that's
He's not listening.
I think that's the thing about it, man. Like, I think it's so nice that they chose to go this route, because I think it just gives you such a well-rounded character, and I think for people who are in the know about who Lonnie Lincoln turns out to be, I think that's very tragic. It's very tragic that this nice individual, clearly who is trying to do his best, is going to turn into something terrible. And I think that's got to be heartbreaking for
maybe.
everybody involved. Well, maybe.
But I think to Jake's point even further, right, is it's like, I know on paper who Lonnie Lincoln is supposed to turn out to be based on like the classic comics, but also like because they've made him such a well-rounded and nice dude, I'm just like, I'm still so invested now in like, okay, but how does that even happen? Or does it even happen? Like, who is this version of this character? And also, yeah, I mean, I think one of the best parts of this episode is when Peter catches the person robbing the pizza place and is like, hey, maybe it's just like, don't call like press charges. Like, it seems like there was just a mistake made here. And I was like, this is the most Spider-Man thing ever. It was the best.
Yes.
I
loved that.
That was really cool.
Spider-Man said restorative justice.
Yeah, he did.
That was really cool. I think getting Doctor Strange right off the bat with a symbiote was just like a nice way to start the show before Peter even gets his powers. That was cool too. Doctor Strange seemingly having no idea how to keep this symbiote in bounds or not mess up the entire school was hilarious too. That it kind of shows like superheroes not great at preventing property damage anywhere, especially NYC. That seems to be a big problem for them. I want to go around the room with like some of the high points of the show so far. Like, are there whether it's moments or plot points, things that interest you? Hunter, this is where I'll start with you here, because in terms of, there might have been an Easter egg that you saw that was interesting, or there might be the way, for instance, which I think we could all get into, is the way that they did the shot-for-shot remake of the Civil War. Peter Parker coming back into the apartment instead of Tony Stark. We get a Norman Osborn. We could talk about that right here.
So sick.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that I just said what one of my high points for this show was, which was the pizza thing. But yeah, I mean, on top of that, Easter eggs are cool, and this show is jam-packed with them. It felt like every single time they introduced a character walking into a door, it was like, whether it's a major Spider-Man character or like a super niche character who appeared in like one issue in 2003 or something, right? Like, all of them were pulled from some corner of the comics. I thought that was pretty neat. That little like attention to detail. And but yeah, the Civil War thing really interested in me because, like Jake said earlier, and Jeff Trammell has talked about this as well, like, it was, when this show was conceived, the idea was that it would take place in the mainline MCU, and that, you know, this would be like the stuff we didn't see around the events of Civil War, and it would be like, this is what, you know, freshman year, this is what he was doing when he still had like the homemade suit and yada yada. And then they found that to be way too restrictive, and so they switched it and added like Norman Osborn, and now it's kind of like a full-length What If series, which interesting in and of itself. But yeah, I think it's cool that they went to do like the full-blown What If show that really has nothing to do with the MCU, but then also still did some like shot for shot. Like, they even opened with the Queens, like they do, and he's like listening.
Yeah, it's the same font.
Yeah, exactly. And like, you
not that I recognize it, that'd be lame.
Not that I also recognize it was the same font or anything, and then said that out loud on the subject.
It's fine. Actually, at one point for like a promo for something, I once looked up the font, and I don't remember off the top of my head. I do have it downloaded on my computer.
No, I actually did whisper to myself under my breath out loud to nobody, "Ooh, same font." It was, you know, that's why we do this. But yeah, even when he like started looking at the car, like suddenly I'm remembering the dialogue from Civil War where he's like, "Crazy car parked out front." I'm like, oh my god, this is the thing. And of course, just having watched any commercial for the show, I know it's about to be Norman Osborn. But yeah, I thought it was so cool to be like, this is what we're going for, is like, this is the vibe of the MCU. And this is almost like what MCU Spider-Man could have looked like and what his story could have been if we had just been able to like use all of these characters from the get. I mean, I don't know if they were able to or not, but you know what I'm, you know, um,
Yeah.
yeah. And so I thought that that was like a really interesting choice to be like it's not the MCU, but then also be like it's kind of the MCU. And I'm curious where they go because like I know that we know Scorpion's in this show, and I'm like, okay, are they gonna do any like shot for shot things with Matt Gargan, or is he gonna be completely different? I don't know.
Yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot to kind of to delve into. Cecilia, how about you? What is there anything specific that you when you were watching those first two, you're like, oh, this thing really kind of stuck with me.
Um, so sort of, but in a different way. So one thing, I'm gonna go a little anecdotal for a second. My son is
Feel
8,
free.
Henry is
Yeah.
8, and he's getting to the age where it's really cool to be into sports, and sometimes it might be cool to be mean. Like it's starting to be like when you're mean, that's
Mhm.
the cool
Yeah.
thing to do.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to figure out, obviously, how to like not have him absorb all this like toxic masculinity while still like you can like all the boy things. So watching this show with him specifically, and he loves Spider-Man and has already watched like all the Spider-Man cartoons on repeat, and so he also knows all the characters, so he's really excited. But then to have that the tenderness with these characters as well coming through, I was thinking a lot about how this show, and Spider-Man in particular, but like with this particular show, what they're doing is they are centering kids far more. They're not centering the MCU. There's like, it's like this is for either you have nostalgia or this is a kids show. And there's a sort of like pedagogical or like a teaching component to it with that. There's like that subliminal, lesson of the day thing that kind of like always sneaks in, and Spider-Man is such a great vehicle for that anyway. So I think that like beyond, and there were tons of moments. Like I loved the Civil War scene. I picked up on it immediately. The second we picked up that DVD player,
So
I was
good.
like,
Yeah, same.
hell yes! I'm so
Catching the
excited.
bus, catching the bus, they did that too. Like that
Yeah,
was cool. Yeah.
I was so excited. And then um Henry was so excited to see, Harry and Norman Osborn in it. And um Amadeus Cho and all like there's a bunch of characters that popped up.
Hmm.
Um but yeah, I think that that's kind of where I'm with it right now. Is just I am still kind of like in the vibes of it all. But I am wondering kind of how this does something a little like softer and more pedagogical. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's one of the things that I was thinking about as I was watching it, is like because it is kind of nodding to all these things and gesturing to all these things. There is a way to just step into it, or like you can read it in a certain way, like looking for all these Easter eggs and all these connections. Um, but
Let me ask you,
yeah.
how are you reading it at this point?
So the way that I'm reading it right now, sorry, I realize now that I'm rambling. Um,
No, that's not even rambling. I
no,
actually want to hear what your thoughts are on.
the
Like,
first thing, so I
yeah.
will admit, the very first thought I had was, is this the great value version of Into the Spider-Verse? Because I did
Mm,
have that thought for a second, where I was like, the animation is like, it seems like it's trying. And I've noticed most animated things have tried to kind of do that sort of style since it came out and haven't
Yes.
quite been able to. Um, aside
Ninja
from
Turtles is closest.
yes, Ninja Turtles, and I think
I
like
like
fucking
that
Puss
movie.
in Boots or something got pretty
Yeah.
close to it too. But
Shout out to
um, I had that anxiety for a second. Um, and then when the credits went, and it was the like Spider-Man, like the old one, I was like, okay, they're actually kind of doing something maybe a little bit different here. Like there's this sort of going back to a source material, and I do think that with all the like promotion and centering him being in school and everything, like it's so much about this particular like stage of life is very much focusing on the Bildungsroman, and so I am, I guess, yeah, I think I have like more thoughts that are just like still very much percolating.
Okay.
But it does have that nostalgia component, and yeah, I'm gonna like sit with it for a second and like
Sure.
come to a coherent thought,
I
and
think
then we'll.
I
Go
think
ahead,
it's
Hunter.
pretty interesting to your point that like they are trying to factor into the nostalgia of it, and like the style of animation is like the cell shaded, like they're trying to make it look like those original like Ditko comics, but they're trying to
Those
make.
credits, Hunter, by the way, those credits where you got the faces all lined up and
Oh,
stuff
totally.
like that. When I
Yeah,
saw that, I was like,
that opening
That
applause,
was
slaps.
cool.
applause.
Yeah, I was.
Great.
It's great, and I also like that every the opening keeps ending with different like recreations of famous Spider-Man covers, which is like kind of cool.
Yeah,
We had Amazing Fantasy, and then we had Brand New Day, which was neat. But yeah, I think it's tapping into that nostalgia to your point, and then it's also trying to be like, how do we take that nostalgic version of Spider-Man that is classic Peter Parker, and it's not like Miles Morales in the modern world, and that take on like modern Spider-Man. It's not like MCU where it's very focused on like what does Spider-Man look like when he's with the Avengers. It's very much like what does Lee Ditko, Peter Parker, Spider-Man, these characters look like in a modern world. I think it's like what does nostalgia look like when you can act upon it in like today, which I think is very neat.
yeah. I think it's very self. I think it's self-aware and as opposed to what Hudson Thames might have thought. I think it's very woke.
Yeah, I was gonna say the thing I enjoy the most is like the side characters and how he's like his best friend is at the very least a queer woman of color with blue hair, and he said it's not woke, and I'm like, I'm glad that you're. The thing is,
Yeah.
he might actually still be using the original definition of woke. He might not be using the bastardized version of it.
He went so far around. He's like,
Yeah, he's back.
Wait, is he coming
Yeah,
is this?
but no, I thought that the relationship
Yeah.
between Nico and Peter was really nice
Mhm.
because I think that like, she's clearly like a more, worldly person. At least she thinks she is, and
Yeah.
she's kind of like talking him through stuff. And I think what your point, Cecilia, about his age is really vital because the thing you can do in animation is because I actually got a DM from one of our patrons who asks me entertainment related questions all the time and he's confused about stuff. Like the first one he ever asked was why do all actors look terrible playing sports? And I'm like, because they were all theater kids, they didn't play sports. And he asked me why do they always cast like 26-year-olds in high school roles? And I'm like, well, one, they want them to be attractive, and 26-year-olds are better looking than actual teens, and because in real life, if you are making a television show, you have people under the age of 18 can only work such long hours. So even though Peter Parker in MCU was supposed to be 15 years old, they had to cast someone over the age of 18 because there was no way that he was only going to be able to work 8 hours a day, right? And the thing about animation though is you don't have to worry about that. You can actually just draw people to look like they're actually, because like if the MCU Spider-Man were to be all about how he's like 14 or 15 and like really digging in on that, I don't think it would work as well because you're like, no, he's not. I know he's not. I know he's 21. Even though I'm going with the charade that he's in high school, I know he's not 15. Whereas like they can make this Peter Parker like 14. He is 14 years old and he is actually like, and like the problems he's dealing with are low scale and like it's not like he's like I like that he gets selected for this internship, but it's not like he's doing important work the first day or whatever. He is just at like a regular internship for a really bright kid, and I think that the ways that these relationships play out are so much easier to do. It's like, right, this is a freshman. Like everyone remembers when they were a freshman and they had a crush on an upperclassman, and it's like it's not gonna happen, lad. She's not gonna see you as an adult, unfortunately.
She
Yeah.
babysat him.
Yeah.
Babysat
And
him.
the thing is, and
That was
unless
rough, man.
unless you're in the American masterpiece that is Longshot 2019, it's not going to work out.
I will say, okay, I'm kind of getting closer to the thought that I was trying to work up to earlier. It is it's so self-referential. I think that's what I meant when I was saying like there's all these pieces to it that it's like in conversation with itself and with all the other versions of it in a really unique way that like the MCU sort of is, but only within the MCU. This show is very much like in conversation and in dialogue with like the larger history of Spider-Man in like our cultural imagination. And so there's all these little teeny tiny things that it just feels like it's so ingrained in our subconscious that like it's easy to pick up and just kind of like Yeah,
in
dialectic with itself.
in reference to both that and what Jake said right before it too, I also think this show kind of nails the humor like for Spider-Man as well. And that like even with the stuff, I mean, yes, like his like I'm fighting the bad guys and I'm making jokes about them, that was all great. But even just when you go back and like read some of those old comics and there's just the little bits of funny from other characters that have nothing to do with Peter like quipping, right? Like the I think two of the moments I laughed the hardest were Peter the babysitter thing when he was like, she wasn't a babysitter. She's like, did she get paid? And he's like, yes, she got paid. And it's like, that delivery was really good. And then the other one was when
That's so
he's trying
funny.
to escape Oscorp to go fight Butane. And he's like, yeah, I'm like pyromaniac or whatever. And then he's like, I'm going to go like Leo. Okay, Parker out. And then he's like super weird about it. And then Asha, I think is her name, is just like, I'm going to go hide the matches. Like that was like, that was like those little bits to me were perfect, and I was like, this is the exact right amount of that Spider-Man humor where you still have like the stakes and the drama, but it's not trying to be like too funny all the time, which is good.
Yeah. I think the thing that it gets at, which I like, is that it is aware, as you mentioned, Cecilia, it's in dialogue with all the other different iterations of Spider-Man, but it is not a postmodern take on it. It's not. It doesn't. Because what can happen is if you are making a property that has been adapted a million times and you're trying to make it fresh, and you're trying to be aware of the previous iterations, what can happen is that you are entirely focused on commenting on the previous iterations, or you actually neglect to have the actual core of what the thing you are doing is. Like that is a tale. Like it, in this age of reboots, like obviously there are reboots that are bad for other reasons, but there are so many reboots that are bad because they're like we know all the jokes, we get all the jokes, and it's like, yeah, but you don't actually have the thing that makes it special. And so like I think it is it's in dialogue in that like it's choosing to keep the stuff it wants to keep, it's choosing to change the stuff it wants to change, and it doesn't. But it's not under any illusion that people aren't aware of what it normally is. You know what I mean? Like when they make his best friend Nico and not one of the other people that's his best friend, and when they don't have a Flash Thompson right away, and like that I think that these are all purposeful decisions that are made knowing most of the audience is going to know that this is slightly different. We don't need to call it out. It just is slightly different, and we don't need to. The fact that it's slightly different does a lot of work for us. That actually it means something, that it's a character you might not normally see, or that this is a little bit different than what you previously saw. The fact that they recreate the scene that Tony shows up in and makes it Norman, they don't need to call that out. But the fact that it's recreated that way gives so much more context to that scene that's actually just not in the scene at all, because they know that you're going to imbue it with all of your own context because it's referencing the previous Spider-Man stuff.
Yes. I think that was very well said. Very well said. Let's talk about Norman Osborn. Voiced by Coleman Domingo, obviously, and
the fucking goat, man. I'm so glad this isn't canon because he can still play another role. Let's do it.
I think the biggest takeaway, and as brief as he was in it so far, man, Coleman Domingo knows how to do a great fucking calm, menacing voice.
Oh yeah.
Feel like you felt like this foreboding. He seems worse than what he actually is, but also not that bad. So it's just like the way that you are able to balance those things, and kind of the small things he says about like how he views Peter, and how he sees him as this genius, and he could get the best out of you and stuff like that. The way that his ethos, his philosophy, all that stuff, that was so fascinating to see. And obviously, of course, we could jump to where he now finds out that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, and the difference between what Tony Stark does and what Norman does is going to be interesting to see as well. But Hunter, let me get your tease. Give me your thoughts. What did you think of seeing Norman Osborn in this form? How did that look to you?
Yeah, I mean, that's Norman Osborn, man. Like that's what he's always. I mean, he's always been that guy who he runs a company. He's got a company to run. Nico says it in one of the episodes.
Right.
Like, yeah, of course he seems like he has to seem nice. If he's walking around and he's just like outwardly sinister, then like his whole thing's not gonna work. And that's what makes it, when I don't know where they're going, but like hypothetically, he wears a certain green suit at some point. It's like, yeah, that's what makes that so terrifying. I'm actually kind of curious to learn more about him because Coleman Domingo is such a brilliant actor, and there's so many layers that he can pull off and bring to a character. And like thus far, we have seen him be kind of nice. He is a little sinister, but there's kind of like two major ways that you can take Norman Osborn, and right now it feels like they're leaning towards one, but I'm just curious to see if they find a way to mix the two, is like most adaptations that I've seen, and he's been both in the comics, so you really can do either, is like,
Right.
you can do the like, he's a sinister mastermind and the Green Goblin is really just a worse version of what's already there. That like Siege Comics thing where it's like, yeah, even the normal Norman Osborn is gonna like try to conquer Asgard or whatever. Or there's the like double persona version where Norman Osborn himself actually in his soul like kind of wants to be a decent guy and like does care about his son and like, you know, has like a wife he loved who died and all of these things, but then has this like darker half that gets pulled out by a goblin serum. And I'm curious to see, because I think Coleman Domingo, if there's going to be an actor to play this guy right now who could take elements from all of that and put it together into one character, it's Coleman Domingo. And it almost makes me wonder. I know, I know Jake just said that, and this, yeah, like it's not canon, so he can totally play another character. But he's, of everyone in the show,
I
he's the
know what
only
you're
like
thinking.
high profile guy that they cast to play a really major character. And it almost makes me wonder if they were like, well, if we did want to bring Norman Osborn
I
into
mean,
like
I'd be in favor of that.
I
yeah,
think
I'm
it
in
is,
favor. They're like,
buddy.
we could
Mhm.
just bring him into live action, and there's
Yeah,
already
He's the
precedent.
right age, even though he
Yeah.
doesn't look it. He moisturizes.
It almost feels like too good of a.
Shout out to Melody.
It almost feels like too good of a casting to
Yeah.
to like not use again. You know,
I
like it's
totally
crazy.
agree. And it's funny, he's talked about speaking to Marvel about doing something. So we don't know what that something is. And I'd be all for it. To be quite honest, like I'd be all for it. I think he'd be a great Norman Osborn. You could kind of see right off the bat. There's this mentor side of it, and there's just also this other side behind it where you could just see him like everything that we've seen in some of the preview videos of the types of suits that Peter wears.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and
And-
you know for a fact. I mean, again, this is Norman Osborn we're talking about. He's not gonna. I mean, maybe it'll be a subtle threat. I don't know. The next episode is gonna start with Peter being terrified, and then Norman's gonna flip that switch again and be like, "Oh my God, it's so great, you're Spider-Man. Let me help you in this." But really, he's gonna be like, "Let me make you my weapon." And
Yes.
like, I'm so excited to see how that
Yeah.
ultimately unfolds because you just know that's what he's gonna do. That's what he's got to do. That's what the character is.
Yes. Cecilia, do you have any thoughts on Norman Osborn and that whole mentor thing, or just generally how, even though we see so little of the character in the first two episodes, we get a big feeling of what kind of presence that he's going to have?
Yeah, I think what's really interesting about this character and this specific iteration of him, it's multiplying the duality of the character in a bunch of different like in relationship to other characters. So it's kind of off the bat this kind of alter Tony Stark situation to what we know there. I do think, I mean, he's black, and so the other like dominant black character in the show, Lonnie, who is going to be Tombstone, like there's also a really interesting but there's two obviously very different, like there's a class difference there, and so there's an interesting like duality going on. And from what we've seen in the first episode already, I don't think they're going to shy away from, I really hope they don't shy away from the conversations about the fact that he's like a very, very, very wealthy, successful black man. I'm like really, really hoping that they do talk about that. And that would make that little twist in the character, I think, be super, super interesting. But he because he is such a duality man, like, are you two different people or are you just pretending? I really liked seeing that kind of showing up already, and so it makes it fun because you're like, I don't know what version of you we're gonna get, and this is your live wire, so that's what makes him so scary and fun, I think.
Because
And there's the
thematically,
Harry.
sorry, what were you saying?
Oh, I said, and there's the Harry of it all, which is like a whole other thing.
Right.
For sure.
Yes.
And thematically, you know, you talk about the fact that they, you know, made him black. I want them to explore that, not because like I need the show to be about the experience of a black CEO, but because I don't. If they're going to do that, I want them to actually be informant. And anyone in America, like, I don't need to say it, like with Race Relations America, you probably do need to have two personalities if you're going to be a black man who's rises to be that successful. And so I think that that's already baked in. We're like, you do wonder, you know, how much he's been able to compartmentalize himself. And I will just say, and this is nothing to do with what he just said, he's dressed so fresh. Like he looks great.
Yeah.
Honestly, like an absolute icon.
He looks like Mr. Green from Clue a little bit. I actually
okay. Well, that's fine. You know what? I'm the one. Anyone watching videos knows now. I love wearing bright colors, and you know, Mr. Green is my guy. Shouts to Michael McKean, I think plays him in the movie. And you know, AC said what are you gonna say? I just got my like.
I mean, I was just gonna say, I think all of those things are well said. I mean, if anything, if we're gonna get the Lonnie Lincoln, I'm getting racially profiled and I'm down on my luck and I'm struggling, then I think it's only fair to see what is opulence, what is wealth, the picture with Captain America in there, like all of those little details, all of those things. You want to see what this person is about and why he seems like he wants to take this interest in Peter besides the Spider-Man aspect, what is behind him. And you can do that in this without it necessarily even feeling like it needs to be so dark because of the way that this show does seem designed for kids. And I think it's a good way to tell this version of a Spider-Man story. I mean, I mean, to Jake's point, like much earlier about the teenager, the teenager freshman aspect of Peter Parker, when he has the conversation with Nico about Norman, he's like, he's a nice guy. And yes, that's normally what somebody who isn't world weary or isn't beaten down by learning about how people are and how the world works would think. So him going into this so earnestly, that will be interesting, the setup as we go for the fall later, when at some point I'm sure him and Norman are going to come at odds. So I think that part is great and fascinating for the show as well. Hunter, were there any other Easter eggs or any like little plot points that you saw that stood out to you, that interested you? I always point to, just like for me, some of the characters that we see throughout, like walking in. I think it was the football. What was the football coach? What character is he again? Because I feel like I've seen him before.
Yes. Yeah. Wait, what was his name? What was if I'm blanking on the name right now? Oh man. Yes, a lot of them are. I mean, like even essentially everyone at Oscorp, like,
Yeah.
the Bentley Whitman is the guy, and he's not even a Spider-Man villain. He ends up becoming the Wizard. Like he's like a Fantastic Four villain, which I think is like kind of funny to have him in there. And then obviously there's like
What
Carla
a
Connors.
curmudgeon he is. Hashtag wash agenda. He is
No, totally.
curmudgeon.
Yeah, shouts to the great Paul F. Tompkins, one of our
I was hyped.
One of our best voice actors. Yeah, shouts to him. I'm glad that he's doing a Marvel thing.
So good. And then there was obviously like Carla Connors being a whole new version of like I was assuming Kurt Connors that we're gonna see. That's pretty neat. There's the two. I don't know for sure, but like when he's fighting Butane and he looks at the tech on his arm, it's like two mechanical O's, which may or may not be like Otto Octavius. Who's to say? Something along those lines. Amadeus Cho is there, which I think is very interesting. The one, Jeannie Foucault, I think, in the comics, she is Taskmaster's daughter. So that's going to be like, but I mean, again, I don't know what of these are just names they're pulling or what. I mean, even Pearl, the upperclassman he's in love with, she's like a newer character from the comics who becomes Wave. She's like an agent of Atlas. I think she was introduced in like 2000, like the 2010s.
Nice.
So like even Asha, like the Wakandan intern there, she don't think she has a superhero name, but like she gets powers at some point. Like all these characters are people.
I like that they're able to just drop these people in there and just include and have them included.
It's cool. And then I mean, even having Midtown, I was curious because in the promos for the show, he's going to like Rockford T. Bale's like high school, and I was confused because I was like, why make that change? And then in the show, obviously, it opens with like, well, they've destroyed Midtown, so he's got to go somewhere, and like that's cool because that's also another school in the comics that tends to lean more towards like like Peter goes to like the nerdy, like he's with the smart kids, and then Rockford Bales High School is like the athletic kids, which is interesting because then you take him away from like the like Neds and MJs and you put him with the Lonnies, right? Which I think is very interesting. It's kind of cool to like have that little detail in there. So all that was really interesting, and then I was also very interested in. I don't even know if it's not really like an Easter egg, like butane, right? Like butane, I
Yeah.
guess is you could call.
What a goofy ass villain he was.
I know, and I guess you
He's
could
awesome.
call him like an Easter egg.
I'm on the wrong block.
I know that was great.
So
That also felt very like classic Spider-Man, like just
Yeah,
like
it's
that's
very
like barely a
classic.
joke, but it's
very
like
much brought to mind the John Mulaney bit. The streets are numbered, you simple bitch.
yeah.
it was so.
But like
that was great.
I'm very curious about where like as many Easter eggs as they have in there, and then like their choices to not use Easter eggs or not use like Butane being essentially an original character. There's like I had to Google it when I was watching the episode because I was curious. I thought Butane's actually a pretty good supervillain name, and like the concept seemed pretty obvious. But like Spider-Man has a fire-based villain. I mean, Molten Man is like famously one of the guys. I'm like, it's interesting they didn't just make this like non-super or metahuman or whatever you want to say version of Molten Man. Instead, there's like he's a new guy named Butane who's basically Shocker, but like with fire. And like that's a role that's a fight that would normally be reserved for Shocker, but it's not. It's like this new guy, and comic book Butane is like this weird like mutant guy who showed up in like one comic book in like the 80s or something like that. So it's like clearly a new character, and I thought it was interesting that like we see him get the spider bite, but instead of the classic science thing, it's like it comes from
The
symbiote
multiverse.
portal maybe or something, and that's interesting. And that almost makes me wonder what concepts did they have in here that were originally thought of for the like freshman year when it was still freshman year, and that they kept because maybe they liked it or maybe they were far enough into like developing it or something, where it's like, was the original idea for MCU Spider-Man always that it wasn't good? I don't remember. I don't think he specifies in Homecoming. Like, was it always going to be that there's some sort of like superhuman fight that he comes across and like that somehow gives him the spider, or like
No, he never says it. Like I think he just says when when what happens, and then he goes into the story of, or at least his feeling is, when something bad happens and you don't do something about it. I love, by the way, that Civil War scene, like when he's talking about that, it's like what makes you do what you do, and then he talks about, well, I can't play sports because I couldn't play it then, so why should I now? Like all that whole thing, like revisiting that, and that's why I think so many people connected with the reshoot of doing that scene again was so cool, because it reminds you of such a wonderful moment of how people were excited to see Spider-Man in the MCU. And I think, to the point that you were making, Hunter, as far as this show, is sometimes we get a gift in terms of them not going through with what freshman year.
Oh yeah, totally. This is way better. To be clear,
definitely, for sure.
Yeah.
To the point of the restrictions, man, I feel like this is just such a. It's a very lively, but also at the same time, like it feels like it is nuts and bolts of what Spider-Man fans, not only comic book wise, but just generally. I mean, I think of Spectacular Spider-Man. I think of the Spider-Man animated series back in the day, Marvel Spider-Man, like all them things that we all watched. That seeing this new evolution of it has been such a pleasure to see, and that's how I feel like generally about these first two episodes. But I think before we kind of like wind things down, is there anything that you look forward to seeing what they put together? Like for me, I want to see some of the other heroes. So like we're gonna see Daredevil at some point. I want to get the explanation from Doctor Strange of, oh, I just dropped in from another universe. What's up with that? Because it seems like we're going to see him again at some point.
Which, to be fair, is a very likely thing for Doctor Strange to be doing.
Yeah.
Yes.
For sure. And for him to just be kind of bad at it, too.
He seemed like he was having a terrible time trying to harness that symbiote and get it out of here. So I'll just go for me. Obviously, Peter's relationship with Lonnie because it seems like they're gonna be actually become real friends. Where that goes, what that means, and how it eventually at some point might change, and we'll see that. Obviously, the
Mhm.
Norman stuff is on its own is very interesting, and just watching Spider-Man do cool Spider-Man shit. That's getting to see that is a lot of fun. Jake, what is something that you're interested in going forward for this series?
I'm interested in just how many villains they're able to have because they don't have to worry about getting a bunch of actors to do something. Like
Yeah,
they can have, like you don't have to worry about setting something. Like they can have like the Lizard and the Green Goblin and Butane and whatever and Tombstone all in the same scene because it's like, yeah, you just draw them in the scene together. And I think that like the ability for like it to feel like a Spider-Man comic where there is like a Sinister Six, even if it's not called that, where it's like, yeah, he just has a rogues gallery that's always around, and at any time one of them can show up, and you don't have to worry like, well, this movie is the Mysterio movie, so we really can't have this one character show up. No. Like anyone can show up at any time, and yeah, they're seeding all this. Like it, I would not be surprised. I would actually probably expect that Dr. Connors doesn't turn into the Lizard for a while. Even though I
and
don't know
that
if
would be
you guys saw
cool.
that
Get to learn
tweet.
about her.
Did you see
She
that
seems
tweet?
a very nice
Do
person.
you see that tweet where it's just a photo, a screenshot, and it says, "I'm trying to see her lizard tail"? People
Uh,
will really be horny about anything.
oh my
Um,
god. Yeah, I
eh.
saw that. That's locked in
Jesus
time.
Christ.
Yeah.
But no, I think that like the fact that everyone's on the board like that and they can choose how they want. I think what the good thing about having all these characters be characters that end up being important in some way or can be important is that you actually don't know where they're going to go because it's like, well, at any point they can decide to make Amadeus Cho a Hulk, and that then he
Yeah.
can be important. They might never do that. He might be an Easter egg, but you're never like, well, that character is not important. It's like, no, since every character is a character from the comics, they could be important at any time.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and Cecilia, how about you? What's something that you're looking forward to?
Um okay, so one of the things that I am looking forward to is this show already is so, and it should be, it's very character driven, which is why I think like the self-referentiality of it doesn't feel like it's Ryan Reynoldsing it. It
Yeah.
feels like earnest to what it is because the center of it is the characters. And if you pick up on the extra stuff, bully for you. And so I am so excited to see all the characters because I do think that Spider-Man, I mean, especially since now Spider-Man just like is almost equivalent to multiverse. Like having his
Yeah.
spider show up and bite him from the it's like at this point we're just kind of like, yeah, sure, makes sense. The shape of the multiverse is a web, spider, and what else? And um
Madam
so
Web.
because of that, there's just kind of this like constant proliferation. There's just like
Yeah.
characters and characters and characters, and that's essential to it. So I'm also really excited about that. And I think that this show, one of the things I've been thinking about because I've started writing or working on my dissertation in Spider-Man is in it is Spider-Man like as an archetype is um he's an archetype now like of his own, and so there's something to it that like it is so generative and it is able to produce like all of these new relationships and all of these new characters and new possibilities for those characters because what's so central to his character is he's like trying to do it all. He tries to do it all. And then eventually he ends up at a point where he has to make a decision. And I think that they're kind of like mapping that similar move into the other characters or seeing that how that move can happen with other characters in a way that continues to open up so many possibilities. And I think that that's like so central to the longevity of this character and of the stories that we can tell with it. And he I am really excited to see how they'll do the same and different all throughout. I think they're just going to do that all throughout this show, um, which puts you on your toes in a different way. It's not like there's just going to be a big twist, but it will be like ooh, they decided to do that with him, and I think
Oh,
that's cool.
yeah, 100%. And you, Hunter, what are you looking forward to the most?
I think the thing I'm looking forward to the most or am most curious about is how they are going to have this version of Peter Parker, or I mean Spider-Man specifically, progress as a hero. I think that, I mean, you look at the marketing for this show, and so much of it was kind of showing off. I mean, it's even in the title sequence, as we referenced it earlier. That's like we know at some point in the show he's going to have like the Future Foundation suit, and we know at some point in the show he's going to have like I think it was like the Ricochet suit, like the Identity Crisis stuff, and there's like a glimpse of like the Scarlet Spider suit, and like all these things, and there's not like that many episodes in this season, and they're all like 30 minutes. And so I'm very curious to see, this was a really big thing with MCU Spider-Man, right? Was everyone kind of had their own heated opinion on, yeah, he has the homemade suit, but then it's like Tony Stark makes him his suit. And then there's the whole like plot point of like, well, if you can't survive without the suit, then you shouldn't have it, like that sort of thing. And I think that we might see an inverse of that with Norman, where Norman is like, oh, if you can't hack it with this suit, then I need to make you like a better suit. And like maybe his
Great
progression
point.
as a hero
That's what it
is
seems like, yeah.
oh, this suit is not what makes me good. And then maybe we don't see the classic Spider-Man suit until the very end when he makes it, because he's finally like, actually, I don't want all these like crazy suits that Norman is making me. Like, I don't know if that's what's gonna happen, but like I'm curious to see in comparison to the MCU, because they seem to really want to hit a lot of the same beats with it while keeping it different. Kind of like what that looks like, and how like I said before, this version of Spider-Man hits all of those beats, and somehow comes across all these bits of Spider-Man lore that normally wouldn't happen until like much later, and like how that factors into his development. And like you said, like we know he's going to come across Daredevil at some point, but it's like, when and how does that happen, and like how does his time with Daredevil impact him as a hero in comparison to like mainline MCU Spider-Man, where he immediately was in like a fight with Black Panther and Hawkeye and all of this stuff, and now it's like, oh, outside of like, it seems like the only other superhero he's going to really see is like another street level hero. So it's like, how does that impact his growth in comparison to what we've been seeing in a lot of these adaptations lately? That's, I think, what I'm most interested in.
Yeah, I think the street level stuff is always fun to get to. It's always fun to see, especially as this series goes on. I also like the way that they've decided to drop the episodes of this series. They did two this week. I believe they're doing three next week, another two, and then the final three to close out the 10 episode run of this season. We already know there's going to be a season two. So that's already getting close to being in the can as far as that's concerned. So I think this feels like a show that has legs. There's been generally positive thoughts about it, and I think that excites me as a fan. And if these two episodes were any indication, I feel like we're in for a fun time. And I think it was so funny because I was thinking about, all right, Daredevil's March 4th. I'm like, just get to March 4th. Just get to Daredevil. I'm like, I'm here for that. We got Captain America along the way. How are we gonna get there? And then this series' first two episodes, with any indication, makes it a lot easier to get there because we have something that's good in the meantime. So that's great. Looking forward to covering the rest of this series. I want to thank our guests for joining us. First, Cecelia, thank you so much for coming back on the pod. Where can we follow you? Where can we find you? All of those wonderful things.
Um, well, you can Google search Cecelia Alfonso-Stokes and see probably my social medias pop up.
There you go.
Obviously, the degree to which I participate in social media is in flux,
I get it.
changing
I
day over
understand.
day.
I understand.
But yeah, I'll leave it simply at that for now. And I don't know, you'll hear from me again soon, probably.
Absolutely. Absolute pleasure having you back. Hunter, as always, you already know. Appreciate you, sir, for coming through. Where can we find and follow you, sir?
I am Radesi 14. That is HRADESI, the number 14 on everything. Although I am currently locked out of my Twitter X account, whatever you want to call it, and gave up on trying to get back in. So I'm mostly just using Instagram at the moment. Again, I don't know. That may change someday, but that is me on everything. And then I'm gonna say, because I have a good feeling about this. I can't say what it is, but I think people who listen to this podcast really should follow, maybe perhaps KCBC Beer, if they're interested in beer. That is where I work. I'm waiting to hear back on a green light for something that might be really cool and interest people. there was meetings about it today. Suffice to say, like if we recorded this tomorrow, I might have been able to talk about it. So like that's how close we are to being able to
Yeah.
talk about this. But
Let me know when it comes to pass, and
Sure,
I'll make sure
sure.
we put something out on our
Yeah.
accounts.
thank you.
Definitely
But
will.
yeah, everyone, please follow there because in terms of exciting things I have coming up, it'll be there first. So
Awesome. We'll be looking forward to talking to you about that when it does come to pass. And Jake, how about you, sir?
You can follow me at the Jake Christie on Twitter, at Jake Christie on Blue Sky, at the Jake Christie on TikTok. Still doing the TikToks every day. And watch the space at sometime soon in the next couple weeks. I'm gonna try to do some type of live stream. Raise some money for an organization with trans youth. I'm still trying to figure out what to do with it. So just watch
Awesome.
that space. I'll announce it on all platforms when it comes to pass. It's
Wonderful.
been a while since I've done one. And you know what? I've been sitting here, just like it's been too long since I sat in the same place for 24 hours. So I gotta rectify that.
Jake, a hero of many. Appreciate you, sir. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at AnthonyCanton_3. Follow me on Blue Sky at AnthonyCanton3. Follow the show on all platforms at MC University Pod. If you want to hear me and Jake talk about our origins and our show in a different light, our pal Rod, who frequents the show often, we went on his show with his wife Karen this past Tuesday, The Black Guy Who Tips. We talked a lot about how we came to be as a podcast and some MCU stuff and some comic book nerd stuff in general. So like if you wanna hear us kind of pontificate it a different way, you could check that out at the Black Guy Who Tips podcast. It was this past Tuesday's episode. You definitely check that out. Of course, subscribe to the YouTube channel, Patreon I mentioned at the top, all of those things. Appreciate everybody for listening and supporting. So for Hunter and Cecelia and Jake, I'm Anthony Canton III. This has been Marvel Cinematic University, and we will talk to you next time.